Monday, he was talking about Sidney Powell pleading guilty, and he brought up Operation Trust and how that relates to QAnon.
So basically, they're telling people, like, you don't have to fight against the corruption in the government because it's being handled behind the scenes.
I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjakovich. And we are unapologetically outspoken. Hey everyone, happy Wednesday. So this is going to be one of those like conspiracy theory days, but it's all relative to things that are happening right now. So one of the big stories last week was Sidney Powell turning on Trump. And so this actually makes her the third of Trump's lawyers to plead guilty in this Georgia racketeering case against Trump in his alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And so the other two lawyers who pled guilty are Jenna Ellis and Kenneth Chesbrough. And surprise, surprise, all three of them have received leniency and none of them will be doing prison time. And then all three of these lawyers were very heavily involved in influencing Trump with trying to overturn the election. And I want to bring up an interesting op-ed I read in the LA Times about how Trump's January 6th, she referred to it as a plot, couldn't have been accomplished without crooked lawyers. And so while the article was clearly written by a leftist Democrat, I do want to read a couple quotes from what she wrote because it raises some important questions and issues. So she wrote, quote, "Lawyers weren't just involved in Trump's plot. They devised it and enabled it. Lawyers developed the strategies, manufactured a faux constitutional crisis, and manipulated legal requirements in the effort to keep Trump in power and give his attempted coup the trappings of legality and legitimacy. Without the phony electors, none of the efforts to use them to undo Joe Biden's victory would have occurred. No pressuring of Pence to reject the votes, no rally in Washington to encourage Trump in that direction, and no storming of the Capitol," end quote. So again, I think this is all a very leftist view. But she brings up the important issue that these lawyers were all absolutely critical in this whole process, which, by the way, I don't know if you saw this, Stephanie, but Business Insider reported last Thursday or Friday that okay, so Sidney Powell pled guilty, but she's apparently claiming that the DA extorted a plea deal from her. And if you look at all her social media accounts, they're still pushing the claim that the election was rigged and prosecutors are targeting conservatives. But my point here is that all of these people turned on Trump, and they were all the lawyers who were adamantly supporting him for the past few years. So here's where I'm going with this. As we all know, I'm a huge fucking fan of Andy Frisella. And so I try not to be a hoe and share the show as often as possible when it relates to topics that we talk about on our show, which is all the time. So last Monday, he was talking about Sidney Powell pleading guilty, and he brought up Operation Trust and how that relates to QAnon. And I hadn't heard of Operation Trust, but we've talked about QAnon briefly in our episodes before. And when I listened to this episode of Real AF, it was kind of a holy fuck moment for me because many people, I still kind of harbor this hope that Trump is going to prevail and he's going to save the country. And I know it's very highly unlikely at this point because the left is either going to find or create a reason to put him in prison, or we talk about all the time, they'll find a way not to even have an election. But when I was listening to this episode, it just kind of confirmed for me that we're fucked and no one's coming to save us. And so I want to play this clip, and then Stephanie, I want to get your take on it because you always know a bunch of cool conspiracy stuff. And I'm guessing that you've probably heard about Operation Trust more than I have. And this is a pretty long clip, but it kind of sets the stage for what I want to talk about. So I think it's worth listening to. So here it goes.
Here's a big problem that I have. Do you know what Operation Truth was?
No.
Do you? Pull up Operation Truth. Operation Trust? Trust. That's it. Okay. Here's what happened. The Bolsheviks set up an operation to make people believe that the good guys were in control. And what this did was this quelled the revolution, the potential revolution of people who were anti-Bolshevik, and helped them identify who was anti-Bolshevik. And then when they actually got in power, guess what happened to these people? They were killed. All right. Now, what does that sound like to you? That sounds a lot like this thing called Q. All right. Who Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood and fucking a whole bunch of other people pushed out into the public as a real thing. Okay. Now, what was the effect of the QAnon narrative? The effect was people were pissed and they said, don't worry, the white hats are in control. It's a movie. Trump is still president. It's a movie. He's in charge. The military's in charge, blah, blah, blah. And what this created was an opportunity to quell the resistance and identify the people who were on the side of the resistance. Now, all of you who are out there that believed in this shit, bet that you were on a list of somewhere in some way, shape, or form. Eventually, you will be dealt with if these people continue to maintain power. And you have been fooled, and you have been lied to, and you have been misinformed intentionally so that you would not revolt against this shit over the course of time. And these people that they're talking about were part of pushing this sort of phenomenon into the culture. All right. And that is real shit. What was Mike Flynn just came out like 2 days ago and wrote this long post about how QAnon's fake and you guys quit believing this shit. Well, bro, you were one of those guys who was pushing that shit out. Okay. So what the fuck team are you on? All right. And you guys who are sitting here thinking, oh, well, Trump's in control and everything's going to work out. No, the fuck he isn't. And no, the fuck it isn't unless you stand up and speak up right now. Okay. So all of you thinking this is a movie or this is, theater or this is an operation to show you the truth. No, this is actually happening. And all of that is being fed to you so that you believe someone else will ride in and handle it. And no one is coming. No one is coming. And so the damage that these people did was not just grift. The damage they did was they lied. And what's happened because of their lies is that a whole bunch of people that would have stood up 3-4 years ago didn't and haven't. And now we're here. And that's a big fucking problem. So if we talk about like real shit, like who's a traitor to the people of this country, the people that push this conspiracy into reality, knowing that it wasn't true, are the biggest traitors of them all. The biggest traitors of them all. They are more of a traitor than the actual people perpetrating the crimes because they knew that it was bullshit and they put it out because they were paid or somehow compensated or promised something to put it out.
Or installed there and knew what was actually going to happen. So that makes a lot of sense.
So there's a couple things here that people need to understand. One, QAnon is bullshit. Okay. It may align with what is going on and you may say, oh, but it's all happening. Okay. Well, yeah. If the other team knows what's going to happen and then they put it out and say, this is what's going to happen, the evidence actually should be this. They've known, here's how you should look at Q. They've known, meaning the fucking enemy of our country has known that they were going to do this step by step by step by step all the way along the way, including the names of the people who were going to execute the plays that they ran for the last 4 years. Because how Q came about was it came about on a chat forum called 4chan, where they were posting what was going to happen back in 2017, 2018. All right. So how do they know this was going to happen? And you got these people out here thinking, well, there's time machines and they know. And this, like, no, for real. That's part of the conspiracies. Yeah. Okay. And that's wrong. What you're dealing with is an operation by communists and by Bolsheviks who have done this before in history. And we've talked about this on the show before. This exact thing. I call it Operation Truth by accident, but Operation Trust. We talked about it years ago. Okay. And I tried to warn you guys years ago.
The first arrest will shock you.
Yeah. Right.
How do they know that?
Yeah. The first arrest, it's fucking Trump. Right? Like, bro, listen, man. This is a communist insurgency that's been happening for years. They have planned it out step by step by step by step. They are intentionally dismantling the country right in front of your fucking face, and they have convinced you that somebody is going to ride in on a white horse and save the day, and nobody is coming. And so the people who perpetrated that lie, I'm not talking about the people who fell for it. I'm not talking about the pages who, the regular people but those pages that push this shit, they are part of that operation. Understand that. So it's a big problem because now we've sunken down into this point where if we don't take action, at least with our voices, and at least with standing with our fellow Americans, they are going to continue to destroy this country. So what's happening here is very real. It's happening day by day by day. And they have convinced you to stay silent, just like they've convinced you to stay silent with political correctness, with cancel culture, with silent majority. They have now used this Operation Trust that they now call Q to keep you silent while they took everything from you. So at what point in time are we all going to wake up and say, fuck, nobody's coming, it's us, for real? I'm here to tell you that is right now. So I don't know what else to say to that.
Oops. Okay. Very long clip, but what do you think of that?
Yeah, so I have been hearing a lot of the same thing lately, where a lot of people are waking up and realizing the whole Q thing is just bullshit. I never followed Q, so I can only speak to what I've seen other people post, but it was the QAnon conspiracy theory that was posted on that forum. I think he said it was called UChan or 4chan or something. But I remember people thought that Trump was Q, anonymously posting and warning us and feeding us the truth. And from what I've gathered over the years, the story is that QAnon is part of the NSA. The NSA is the National Security Agency, and the conspiracy is that the NSA was put in place by the cabal, the elites or the bad people, to spy on all of us through our phones, computers, and other, surveillance. But in doing so, they themselves were then spied on. And that there was a group of good guys in the NSA that saw these horrific satanic crimes that the cabal was doing, especially with children. And they formed this group, QAnon. And Trump and all these other good guys in the government know about it and are secretly creating a plan to save the country and get rid of the cabal. So there's this event that Q calls 10 Days of Darkness, where everyone will be under lockdown, and the TVs and devices where we would hear the National Emergency Alert System, they would all reveal all of this to the public and share all the truth and all the crimes that the cabal has committed. And while that's playing, the good guys will be rounding up the bad guys. And it'll be scary, but we won't be afraid because we'll know what's really happening, and we'll know that it's the military that's on our side. And so if they come knocking on our door, we don't have to be afraid because they're the good guys. So this is where that Operation Trust comes in, because if we're under martial law and the military comes knocking, the people who would normally fight back will willingly go with them because they've been fed this lie that oh, these are the good guys. These are the white hats, they call them. And this whole lockdown event is actually a good thing because it's getting rid of the cabal. So basically they're telling people you don't have to fight against the corruption in the government because it's being handled behind the scenes. And so it keeps people tame and compliant and waiting for an event that's never going to happen. And that Operation Trust is eerily similar to Q. It was this counterintelligence psyop in the 1920s with the Bolsheviks in Russia, who were the communists. And what they did was put out fake information that there were these anti-Bolshevik revolutionaries throughout the government with military leaders and generals, kind of like Mike Flynn. And they were about to rise up and kick out all the communists and return the country back to normal. But this whole thing was a lie used by the communists to identify who the real anti-Bolsheviks were in the population so that, Andy Frisella said, they could deal with them. And I mean, that it sounds so similar when you put them side by side. It's the same play.
Yeah. And if you doubt any of this, you can actually go on the CIA.gov website. There are official government documents that reveal the whole history of Operation Trust in detail. They have these documents that were released in 2002. I think it's 2002. And they're a translation of Russian documents that were released in 1950. And so, yeah, I didn't read the whole thing because it was pages and pages and pages, but it does sound very much like QAnon.
Yeah, and it worked out well, so they're using it again. And like the whole thing with Q is, in order for it to be believable, just like any conspiracy theory, they have to tell some truth. They have to like weave some truthful things throughout it. But Q as a whole, I think, is to build trust with the people that would be the resistance, the gun owners, the outspoken, and make them think, you know, you don't have to do anything. It's all being handled. You just hang tight. Like, we've got it covered. And so while they're building their trust, they're also like making these people look like a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists in the public eye. And people do take this to a crazy level. Like, on TikTok, I see them, they will decode Trump's posts. Like, if he posts something on Truth Social, they like do this decoding, and they do all these like nonsensical things to twist what he says into a secret Q message. So like they'll take the numbers of the timestamp in his post, and then they'll go like read the Q post that correlates with that number. And they'll be like, see, he's giving us this like secret message, and he thinks that Trump is like talking to them in code. And the thing is, like, this, like he said, this has been going on since like 2017, I think. And Q keeps saying it's coming. And just keep waiting, just keep waiting. But after years of waiting for this event and nothing happening, a lot of people that did follow it are starting to realize that they've been played and nothing's ever going to happen. And they're sick of waiting. And it was all a scam to keep them at bay, thinking that like everything is okay. And then there's other people that are just in pure denial. So they come up with these extravagant stories that like literally they think that all of these bad guys like Biden and Hillary Clinton have already been dealt with through the secret like military tribunal, and they were actually executed, and now it's just clones or people wearing these like realistic masks playing the role. Like, I'm not even kidding you. There's people, a whole group of people that really believe this. And so Andy Frisella brought up another really good point in that clip, which is like, why at any point in time did Trump not speak up and say, hey, this isn't me? Like, he brought up how Flynn just did that recently, but why did they let this go on for years? Like, why wouldn't they say, hey, this is bullshit, don't fall for it? So that does raise an important question. Like, if this were just like another Operation Trust, then why wouldn't like Trump and these guys speak out about it? And there are a lot of posts from Trump where he will use like specific words or phrases that do look a lot like what's in some of these Q posts. So that brings like this whole other conspiracy theory where people are now questioning Trump, thinking like he was in on it and he is part of the cabal, the elites in power, and like he's just as corrupt as the rest of them, but he's just playing a role to make us think that he's the good guy that's fighting to save America. Now, my gut says no. Like, I think he genuinely cares about this country, but there's another part of me that thinks that our whole political system in Washington is just one big theatrical performance, and like no one really has a say or an influence, and there is like this shadow government making all the decisions and just makes us think that we're in control. So my gut says Trump's a good guy and he does care about the country, but like this does just bring a lot of questions up. So I don't even know what to think at this point. What do you think, Tara?
Like, Trump has a lot of faults, obviously. He has this enormous ego. And I think he definitely has the capacity to be ruthless, because you can't get ahead in business the way that he has without having the ability to be cutthroat. But I choose to believe that he's a good guy and that he legitimately cares about this country. And I'm not very, like, when it comes to politicians, I feel like they're all fucked up, but there is something about Trump that I choose to believe he's good.
Right.
Maybe
I
that's
agree. Like, and I feel like I'm very good at reading people, and I don't think he's like part of this, Operation Trust or whatever, like willingly or knowingly. But here's the thing, it's like all the evidence that has come out against Biden with like the bribes and everything and Hunter Biden, if Q was real, don't you think these top government officials that are a part of Q would have stepped in by now? Like, we're on the verge of World War III. We already sent way too much money to Ukraine. Our economy is tanking. The border's overrun. Like, if there was anyone that was going to save us, they wouldn't have let it come this far. They would have stepped up and done something. But instead, the only person that's being prosecuted is Trump.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, if there is this grand plan to step in and save the country, like how much longer are they going to let this stuff go on? Like, it doesn't make sense at this point. Like, we know the elites in power are pulling the puppet strings, and I can totally get on board with the idea that this QAnon concept is just a distraction to give people hope so that there isn't an uprising. Because when you look at human nature, like, when good people believe that good prevails, what do? They follow the rules, they do as they're told, and they expect that, good is going to overcome evil in the end. And like, even you and I believe that to some extent, because every time one of these new investigations come up, we keep hoping that this evidence is going to get, the evidence getting exposed is going to lead to justice, right? But nothing ever happens. And I'm going to go off in the weeds a tiny bit here, but looking back at like the midterm elections, I totally believe that they were rigged. And I think they let in just enough Republicans to give them control of the House, but not control of Congress as a whole. So we have this Republican majority House, so they can keep coming up with investigation after investigation with all this evidence against the Biden crime family to give people hope. But do they ever actually get anything accomplished? No, because it's just a fucking distraction to keep people calm and keep them orderly. Because again, if good people have hope, they don't revolt. So we all just sit here waiting patiently for the right thing to happen, and for, things to, the white horse to come in and save us from corruption. And it's like, but the corruption is so deep that, let's say Biden is impeached, right? What are we left with? Fucking Kamala, Newsom, a myriad of other equally corrupt elites that Obama literally has like waiting in the wings to step in and continue the plan of destroying the country, because it's like so much bigger than this, right? We talk about this. It's a plan for a one world government. And America is like one of the few countries that has not historically been ruled by a totalitarian or communist regime. And so the way like my mind is thinking is like, we have this proud history of, like choosing our leaders, and we can change things with our votes, right? So then you have like QAnon and MAGA and like the American Patriot movement. And like, for the most part, yes, you have your, weird as fuck people, but for the most part, these are movements of people who still believe that we have the power to change the country with our votes, right? And, most of them believe that our voting system is corrupt, which it is. But then you have our government calling these movements domestic terrorists and extremists and against democracy. And it's like painting this picture of these people being negative extremists trying to destroy America, when it's really the exact opposite. And right, most of these groups are comprised of people who believe in America and believe in that good prevailing over evil concept. And so what if these movements really were all actually planned and created by the global elites to keep this weird balance of hope alive in order to make the takeover of America easier, because it's preventing like a full-scale uprising and allowing them to slowly take over by wearing us down like, the frogs in the boiling pot of water, where we get to the point where we're just not resistant.
Well, look at January 6th. We know that there were FBI agents posing as J6ers. And so it's like, we know that they infiltrate these groups. And, when Andy Frisella was talking about how with this Operation Trust, they created a list, we know they were creating lists. They were showing up at school board meetings and creating lists of parents that could be domestic terrorists. You don't think they were doing that with Q? The people like doing that, or people like us that have like a podcast where we're outspoken? I mean, absolutely. But back to the whole Trump thing, something that kind of like clicked with me that does give me a little bit of hope. And it didn't really click until you were like reading through that at the beginning. But his position with this whole Georgia case from the beginning has been that all he was doing was taking the advice of his attorneys who should know better. So in order for that to be true and for him to get off on that, like his lawyers would have to be guilty. So maybe this is part of their plan. Like, okay, we're going to take this guilty plea so we get no jail time. And then he has his case. Like, look, they even pleaded guilty. And then, like she's already doing, they're going to say like, oh, we were coerced into taking a plea. And it really is like corruption. And so maybe this is just like part of their legal strategy. And they're not really turning against Trump. They're just kind of like giving him what he needs to say, like, look, I took the advice of the people that, are the legal experts. And so I do think there could be like a plan to all of that, but who knows? I don't know what to believe at this point.
Yeah,
And
I know.
honestly, like just like you said, I think they will stop at nothing to make sure that Trump is not in power again. And Tucker Carlson talked about this. He's like, okay, they tried, all these smear campaigns and they tried the classified document thing. Now they're like literally trying to throw him in jail and end his businesses and take all of his money. They're like, what's next if that doesn't work? Assassination. Like
Right.
they are going to try to take him out one way or another. And so it's like I want to have hope, but at the same time, I'm losing it. Like I don't think, even if he does get in there, what's he going to do? The border's already been open for 3 years. We're already in World War III, basically. Like, what's he going to do? So it's like, I have hope, but at the same time.
I know. Yeah, I know. That's how I feel every day.
But I'm glad we did this episode though, because if there are people out there that are like hardcore Q people, like I just question everything. Don't trust anything. This government, they do watch these things and there's no way like they were just gonna let a group from the NSA like post stuff. You know what I mean? So it's like use your common sense, and sometimes it's hard admitting that you fell for something that was a psyop, but it's better than to keep believing a nonsense story. So I hope it kind of like gets people to look at that from a different perspective.
And as everything else, like the whole thing with, these anti-Semitic incidents going on, it's all history repeating itself. Like look up the Operation Trust documents. If you have a few hours free, you can read them. They're very long, but it's like, it's a holy shit moment where you realize like, yeah, it's the same power play. Like it's just happening here where we don't think these things happen in the United States, but it is.
Exactly. So yeah, use your common sense. I know it's a rare thing these days, but if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have it. So use it and just question everything. Just don't fall for anything. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. I hope you guys have a great day, and we'll see you back here on Friday.
If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.